I'd like to formally introduce everyone to today's webinar, the new rules for customer service. I am Charlie and I'm the features editor here at Call Center Helper, and we have two wonderful guests to bring to you. The first of which is Martin Dukes from Empathy Plus. How are you doing today, Martin?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Thank you, Charlie. Thanks for inviting me to take part again.
Excellent, no problem. And do you want to give, for those who've just dialed in, do you want to give us a quick little background into what Empathy Plus do?
Yes, we're a management consultancy that support our clients by helping to improve performance, develop new strategies, improve the customer experience, but also offer general support to their operations where they need some help.
Excellent, and we're looking forward to your presentation today.
Thank you.
Our second speaker is Mike Murphy from Genesis. How are you doing today, Mike?
Really good, thanks, Charlie. Really good. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to the webinar.
Excellent. And again, for those who have just joined us, do you want to give us a quick little background into what Genesis do and kind of your role within the company?
Yeah, so this year actually will be my 10th anniversary with Genesis. So 3 of which Genesis, 7 of which was Interactive Intelligence, which Genesis acquired 3 years ago. But I would say it's a very different Genesis to what people may know from over time, if you will. And I would encourage people to give us a look. We're very much, if you will, a Gartner Magic Quadrant leader, which is cool. But we're very much accelerating the innovation around this space, and that's something which our peers, if you like, our competitors, may be sort of struggling to do. And from our perspective, we see a great opportunity that we're looking to exploit. So, we are aggressively innovating. So, from that perspective, we've just closed out our customer event in Denver last week, and we've had some really positive buzz around that, which is quite nice. So, we have a European version of that coming up in September. So, won't be as big, I'm sure, but it'll be good to have the messages shared over in Europe.
Excellent, and it's going to be great to hear more about those innovations that you spoke of in your presentation today. But for anybody joining us for their first webinar with us, we try to make these webinars as interactive as possible. So if you also want to join in the chat room alongside today's webinar, if you could go to www.callcenterhelper.com/chat, and this will enable you to ask kind of tips and questions that we can put to our speakers after their presentation. So it's really great if you want kind of that expert help. And an added benefit of being in the chat room is that you can also download the slides and the chat log for after today's webinar if you want to reflect back on certain key points that were discussed. And what I like to do in our webinars is to have the chat room on the same screen to the other side of the window, so I can keep an eye on both as they're going along. And if you aren't in our chat room, you can also watch the replay and download the slides, which will be available this afternoon at www.callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars. And in the chat room, where you can put your best tips and best questions, if you could use hashtag tip for a tip and hashtag question for a question, and you'll win a chance to win a bottle of champagne or a box of chocolates for the best tip. And I think we're going to start today's webinar with a poll. So what we want to ask today is, where are you on your digital experience roadmap? Totally digitally enabled, fully digitally enabled, some digital, only phone, or what's a digital experience roadmap? So I'll quickly launch that poll for everyone. Martin, what are you expecting to come up here?
I think there could be quite a mixture. I'm hoping there's quite a mixture, because it sort of suggests that the audience is mixed in their experiences. So some will be able to offer some tips, and others will really benefit from those tips and hopefully from the content of the webinars.
Yeah, excellent. Let's see if you're right then and share the results with everyone. And well, we can certainly see a big favour there, with 70% of people saying some digital, 11% saying what's a digital roadmap, and then we have the others, which are 7% totally digitally enabled, 6% fully digitally enabled, and 6% only phone, which shows some interesting variation, which I think will lead on quite nicely to your presentation, now, Martin, so I'll just pass the baton over to you.
Thank you. There should be happening.
Yeah. Excellent. We can see the slides.
Can you? Okay, great. So thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction and for inviting me again. I want to talk about the new rules for customer experience, the subject of the webinar itself. Very interesting to pick up on the poll results, which shows quite a variation, but a lot of people who have some digital experience, and they're along that road. So hopefully there'll be something for you to get out of this. When we talk about the new rules for customer experience, I started thinking and planning what I was going to talk about, and I thought, well, actually, what do we need new rules for? So I looked back and I came across something last week that was really interesting, which was, and I'll show you a clip of it here. It's an extract from a post office telephonist training notes in the 1930s, which I found a fascinating handwritten little notebook. But you can see the note, it says there, the following points should be observed when handling all telephone calls on all occasions. And it talks about politeness, speed, accuracy, tact, discretion, and secrecy. So quite an interesting observation on what were the rules in the 1930s. And I thought, well, actually, if we look at those again, and we look at how they're used in the current day, there we have them on the screen. And I thought, well, actually, politeness is still measured to a degree within CRQM. Speed is still measured with average speed of answer, predominantly relating to telephone calls, but there is some work with chat in there as well. Accuracy can be measured and is measured by some organisations through their quality monitoring process. But if you look at tact and discretion, I'm not sure how much they're used. Secrecy, of course, we have secrecy tools in place with PCI for call recording, and also the emergence of data protection and GDPR. So in some ways, we haven't moved all that far away from those initial rules. But then I started thinking, well, actually, why do we need to change? Why do we need new rules? And it led me to think, what's actually new? Well, of course, we have a lot more channels than we had in those days, where it was telephone, maybe telegram, and probably the written letter. We've got a real expansive choice. We have 24-hour service, which people are using extensively now, predominantly through self-service. So that means that people are able to serve themselves in whatever interactions they choose to do. We look at artificial intelligence, which is then helping to generate responses and provide information without necessarily relying on humans at that time. I think the world of complaints has grown and grown and grown, and people are more likely to complain now than perhaps they were in the past, particularly when they're facing poor service. And a lot of that is fed back on social media. So we see a lot more people that are, rather than complaining, they'll post something on Facebook or Twitter, which sort of announces their complaint and announces their poor experience. And hopefully, I think a lot of the time, attempt to engage with that organisation and get some support through there. Customer expectations are continually changing. They're generally based on the most recent interactions. So we see that's changing, and the way that that people want to work with organisations changing. Smartphones are almost a necessity in life now. So we see the ability to do so much more from a handheld device than we saw in the past, particularly with most organisations providing an app now to be able to engage with. And then my final observation on what's new is data. And of course, data's always been there, but it's used a lot more extensively now in sort of developing personalized experiences and predicting consumer behavior. But with that also comes the need for greater data protection. So I already mentioned the GDPR. What is it that organisations want in the new world, which is again quite an interesting thought. I think most organisations want to have some efficiency within there, or certainly they don't want to be inefficient. They want to be able to offer multiple channels, different channels, but those channels need to be appropriate and have an appropriate cost of service. So it's really important that the channels and the behaviours of the services are appropriate to the brand or the organisation's products. They're looking for a return on investment. So running a frontline operation is quite a significant investment, and organisations are now looking to make sure they get a return from that and that they're able to deliver a good experience. The good experience is to most organisations leads to greater customer satisfaction with greater loyalty and an increased customer retention. And of course, we go back to this subject of data again, and data being the thing that organisations want to get more and more and more of to be able to provide a better service and product development, but also make those services and products more appropriate to those customers. Of course, with data, the other thing that's essential for organisations is to be compliant with legislation and the rules around keeping that data and how they use it. So that's what organisations want. What do customers want? Well, customers want to have choice. I've been asking customers what they want for a long time, and the one thing that they continually comes through is they want to be able to contact organisations when they want to contact them and how they want to contact them. So choice of channels and services is really important. The next thing they want is consistency. So it doesn't really matter which channel they're contacting an organisation by. They want to have the same response and have the same answer, the same information, and be confident in that information. They want to be treated with respect, which becomes more difficult depending on which channel you're dealing with. So some automated channels have a different way of communicating with customers to those with the human intervention. And they want to deal with organisations that are easy to deal with. So not just easy to contact, but easy to engage with and understand what they're trying to do, understand the objectives for the customer. Most importantly is having confidence in that organisation. So if you call somebody or email them or chat with them, you want to have confidence that what they're telling you is correct and that they're taking note of your inquiry or your order or whatever it may be. And it sort of almost goes under the radar that wouldn't be there. But believe me, customers want to be sure that they're getting served properly. Timeliness is still an issue. Most people still only, or a lot of people still only manage speed of response with relation to telephone calls. But believe me, it's more important in other channels as well. And customers also are very focused now on the security, particularly when they're making online purchases or giving information out over the telephone. They want to know where that information is going to be held and be sure that it's confident that it's secure. And of course, an interesting side to an interesting view on the customer experience is, I believe that customers actually don't want a bad experience. More, I think to them, they expect to have a good experience, but they don't want to have a bad experience. So a slightly different perspective to organisations. I want to talk now a little bit about how we measure and evaluate performance in the new world, and some of the tools and phases that we use as an organisation. We look initially at a set of 8 criteria for each channel. So we look at each channel in isolation. And look at across these different criteria and then assess it and make sure that it's consistent with others and also aligned with others. The sort of channels that we work with, well, we work across all channels because customers are using a wide range of channels. So you can see I've put a few on the screen there. We have telephone, chat, text. Text is still quite heavily used by organisations, although as consumers we may not use it as often as we used to. Social media. And you can see towards the bottom right-hand corner, there's a self-service logo there, and also a question mark for what's next, because who knows what's next. The criteria that we focus on looking at to evaluate the performance is shown here. So by coincidence, they all begin with E, but there's efficiency, effectiveness, empowerment, experience, enablement, and empathy. And I just want to talk for a few minutes about each of those and explain what it is that we're looking for and how we're trying to do it, but also give an example of perhaps a poor measure of, or a poor example of each of those criteria. So please forgive me for some of my personal experiences from recent times. The first area that we focus on is efficiency. And as I said before, most organizations want to understand that they're efficient, but also customers are expecting efficiency as well. So we look at an individual channel and we look at and assess how efficient is that in dealing with customer inquiries, and how well is the process associated, not just with the service, but also the handling of that service. The example I give there is a set of telephone wires. I've got a second property that has a telephone line. I received a bill for it recently from a large telecommunications organisation, without wishing to name them. And the bill was incorrect because there'd been a large period of downtime through a fault, and I'd also changed my billing address as well. So I went online to look to how to do it, and quite helpfully it advised me to engage with them on chat. And I thought, yeah, okay, that's fine. I can chat with them and change the address and also get a discounted bill or get the bill resent out with the correct price. So I went to chat. After some time queuing, getting through, talking to an advisor, chatting with an advisor, I was told, actually, you need to do this by telephone. And for me, that was a really inefficient process because I'd spent quite some considerable time waiting to go through this chat process, but also so had that organisation, and that was all going to be repeated on the telephone when I called them back later. How effective is the channel is looking at, does it really work for the customer? So we see lots of examples of where people try and do things for themselves over different channels, and it just doesn't work for them. So the example I give there is with I was buying a mattress from a large retail organisation, quite well known, or very well known, and I called them because I knew exactly which mattress I wanted. And I was told, I'm sorry, sir, you can't place this order via the telephone. You need to come into the store. So I went in the store, which was about 45 minutes away, paid for car parking, etc., etc. Went, ordered the mattress. Got to the end of the conversation. How would you like to pay, sir? I said, I'd like to take advantage of your interest-free credit, please. To which the response was, I'm sorry, you can't do that face-to-face. You need to do that over the telephone. So again, it looks at that ineffectiveness of those channels working together. We then move on to looking at experience. What's the overall experience when using a channel? Quite interesting and difficult to measure because it's a very personal thing, a customer experience. So we do look at the performance of individual channels from both qualitative and quantitative perspectives, but we also look at the experience from customers and advisors, because it's quite important to remember that advisors have a certain experience when working on channels. So my poor experience example was when I was engaging with a financial services organisation who called me to discuss a rate change with my mortgage, as it happens. They called me, went through the security checks, all okay, went through the information. I then needed to pay a fee, and as I read out my credit card number, the operator at the other end started repeating the number back to me. When I stopped and said, what's actually going on here, you know, you're sort of you're making sure that security is correct in the one area, but on the other end you're reading out my number. I was assured that she was in a private room, but I still felt the experience was poor, and it wasn't really what I expected from a financial services organisation. Little things really make the difference. We then look at empowerment. So how empowered are advisors and customers when using this channel? So you'll recall from the original slide, we talked about discretion being a rule in the 1930s. Discretion actually has a double meaning, and the discretion in those days was more about not talking about what you've heard, those sort of things. So a sort of more of a privacy use of the word discretion. What I'm talking about when it looks at empowerment is what discretion do advisors and customers have to be able to service the inquiry appropriately. So again, we see lots of organisations, it goes back a little bit to Computer Says No for those of you that would have watched Little Britain in the past. Lots of organisations have that, and they don't give advisors the opportunity to show any discretion. But we also see, obviously, in self-service and automated responses less discretion or less empowerment in being able to show any flexibility. How enabled and integrated are individual channels? So it's important, we talked about consistency a little bit earlier, it's important that channels work together and are synchronized and integrated in delivering the same level of services and the same service answers, solutions themselves. So my example here was a call to a solicitor. I needed to call a solicitor to make an inquiry. I went to the website because it was a Sunday evening. Sure enough, there was a contact us button. So I found the solicitor I wanted to speak to, put their name in, etc. Put my message in online and waited for 2 weeks, and I still hadn't had a response. So I decided I would email. So I emailed and said, "Did you get my message?" And within 10 minutes, I had a response to say, "No, we didn't get it." So it's quite clear to me that that organization is offering a channel of communication to actually develop their business, and it's not working because it's not integrated with other channels. So I talked a little bit about how the experience is different across different channels. Well, of course, empathy is also different. Empathy is one of the leading ways of engaging with customers to generate loyalty, retention, etc. But actually understanding and through having a good understanding of what customers are trying to do and their situation. Now, obviously, we see different levels of empathy depending on individual organisations and the services that they're providing, but also the level of empathy offered by individual advisors. And in this case, also a variation in the empathy shown across different channels. So here I'm looking at a self-service terminal from a library. So it's about bringing books back. You can scan the ticket in the book and hand the book back in and check it back in. Very different to a day when I used to go to the library where you take your books back, you'd give them to somebody, and they may say to you, "Did you enjoy that book? I've read that book. What did you think of this?" And there's actually some engagement with it. So a real difference in channels there. And interestingly, yesterday I happened to drive past a mobile library which was calling at people's houses. So again, a completely different channel that maybe I haven't considered in this presentation, that would give a different experience and certainly a different level of empathy. So what else? I talked about 8 different criteria. The other things that we look at are the level of customer satisfaction for each individual channel. So from my experience, most organisations measure customer satisfaction by either an overall end-to-end service or by a telephone call. So we sort of see an inquiry, we may get asked about our level of satisfaction when we finish doing an interaction, but it's about the overall service rather than how they use that channel. What I would like to see is more organisations that measure that overall service, but they differentiate to say, which channel were you using when you engage with us, or actually understanding that and then categorising it, because I think that's really important. And the other thing that we look at is the percentage of the total contacts that are used for each channel. So we start to build up a profile that says, actually, this particular channel deals with 60% of your inquiries, your contacts. And then we can start to look at how that channel is performing and give a different perspective of it. This becomes really interesting when we do it on more than one occasion, because we then start to see a trend. So we can say, actually, that channel appears to be dropping in terms of its utilization. And remember, although I mentioned earlier that customers use different channels, organizations use different channels, ultimately it's the customer who chooses which channel they have, if they have a choice, which channel they use if they have a choice. So it's an indication of how customers are receiving their services. So finally, I just want to show you a quick illustration of an example of an output from one of our pieces of work, where we show the different channels. Then we have an indicator of the red, amber, green indicator of where they are against those different criteria, together with the percentage of contacts and the level of customer satisfaction. Altogether, these are quite interesting in terms of helping to look at the return on investment from different approaches, different channels, but also helping to drive investment in the future. So that's all from me. Thanks very much for listening. If there's anything else I can help you with, then please feel free to contact me. There's contact details on that page there. Thank you.
Excellent, great. Thanks for that, Martin. I thought that's brilliant, and there's lots of key takeaways that we can take from that, including things like splitting CSAT between different channels. Don't push customers down self-service if it's easier for them to handle the issue on the phone. And I loved the opening slide with the notebook from the 1930s. That was a great bit of history. That was great to see.
Amazing handwriting.
Yeah, they always do when you go back in time. So let's go into some top tips and questions now from our audience. And the first tip is coming from Laura, who says, my agents deal with many of the same set of questions over and over and over, and we try to teach them to treat each call like it's the first one of the day. Be sure not to interrupt the customer because you have heard this question already in the 4 prior calls, and as soon as they are a few words in, you know what they're going to ask. This is when you really get the chance to measure empathy. Is this a good tip, do you think, Martin?
Yes, definitely. And of course, it's very difficult when you're dealing with the same inquiry over and over again. But for that customer, that's the only call they're making. So it's really important to listen to them and understand their exact position and help them accordingly.
I think it's kind of great for team leaders as well to have a little conversation every few calls with advisors as well, to kind of help refresh their brain so they're prepared for the next call.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And we've got another question in from Laura once again, who says, what level of support should customers expect from social media? Currently, we do address almost all inquiries, complaints, but many times it's referring them to another channel to get their question answered if it's more in depth. I'm thinking it may depend on the complexity of the question and the industry, but would love to get an expert's thoughts. What are your kind of thoughts on this one then, Mike?
Yeah, I suppose with social really it's the kind of broadcasting effect, isn't it? So it's kind of having to kind of politely take the conversation to a private message, if you will. So that's kind of one element, I suppose. But I suppose like doing that as discreetly as possible, is kind of the thing to do. Because I don't really want to be seeing like a conversation that's getting too intimate kind of being shared, right? So yeah, certainly a challenge there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a couple of opinions now to the question, do you measure politeness, speed or accuracy, tact, etc.? And I guess this comes on from that note, that slide, your first slide, Martin. And Sarah says, we measure soft skills, empathy, understanding, responding appropriately to the situation. We measure how helpful a customer feels and our advisors were. We measure some soft skills, but it's left up to measurement to gauge levels of approval. So I guess this kind of goes back to what you were saying, Martin, on how QM is how this is mostly measured now.
I think so. I think that's obviously the easiest way and the one that's supported most through technology is to do that with regard to telephone calls. And I think what I'm hoping to see more and more of is people doing that and assessing that over different channels as well.
And I think Mike, would speech analytics say would be the best way to kind of measure how customers are feeling, right?
Yeah, like crudely, if you will, like the speech analytics will just create, if you will, a what's the word, like it kind of turns the whole conversation, if you like, into text or a transcript, and then, if you will, being able to kind of assess that. Just like you would assess a text-based conversation. So in fact, you'd probably be able to sort of like spot behaviors, comments, questions, responses where your soft skills could be improved, or you answered over here this way, well actually it might be better to kind of do it this way from going forward. So yeah, certainly the analytics tools I think would be helpful there for sure.
I'm sure we could do a whole nother kind of webinar on kind of the sentiment analysis kind of things with that. It's all very interesting. Maybe in the future.
Yeah.
So we've got an opinion in now from Sarah, who says how we measure empathy. It's based on the perception of the person completing quality monitoring on a scale of 1 to 10. We look at whether they've used words associated with empathizing with a customer and understanding their situation, and whether they have taken appropriate action in line with the customer's query. To ensure consistency, we calibrate with other team leaders and agents themselves. Do you think this is a nice idea, Martin, to kind of include advisors in the calibration process?
Yes, definitely. I think it's essential, really, because otherwise you're not necessarily getting an equal or fair measure. I think measuring empathy is, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, it's a personalised opinion in many ways, and it's not always easy because it's personalised and it's very much on the perspective of the person on the receiving end. We did an interesting piece of work some time ago where we looked at empathy across different channels, and we found that it was a lot easier to demonstrate empathy on a face-to-face basis because, of course, you've got the visual body language aspect as well.
Yeah, I think that's especially true as well. You kind of mentioned the scale of 1 to 10. That's quite a big scale. So if you you might have a problem with the advisors thinking their scores are being treated unfairly if you don't include them in the calibration process. So I think the scale point you mentioned there was also very key. We have an audience tip in from Adrian, who says, we empower our customers by having an involvement network, and we have a complaints forum, which is great. And yes, another tip from Dennis, who says AI will help measure empathy on all calls and not just the ones that you get on the QA radar. Looking forward to this technology. What are your thoughts on the future of AI in the contact center, Michael, and this kind of application?
Yeah, I mean, it's the perfect application for AI, just because there's so much, so analytics produces tons and tons of data. And then, if you will, just to kind of get your way through that data, it's just easier to do with AI. So absolutely, Dennis, there's no question about that. And just the notion, if you will, that everything would be assessed is quite nice. And also as well, just a tip, I suppose, really would be that the more you can kind of keep that cloud-based, just the less hassle it is for you at the kind of customer end, because moving data around and getting it into a shape to be assessed and AI'd, if you like, that's not easy to do. So just kind of keep it all cloud-based is just, they've got lots of energy up there to do it where it kind of belongs, I believe. So yeah.
Yes, it's very interesting to see where AI is going in the contact center. I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on. We have an opinion in now from Claire, who says we have this week asked engaged customers what they think of social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, how the social site has helped them. Would you recommend our site to others? So far, we have received some really good feedback. I think that's a great way to use your show's social channels there. We have a question in from Adrian, who says, what are the panel's thoughts on voice recognition software? I guess this would be best to put to you, Mike. What are your thoughts on the future of voice recognition?
So I kind of feel we're at a sort of the world is changing, if you like, around voice recognition, Adrian, I would say, because we've had a pretty sort of, like, I would say, static vendor choice up until the last sort of few years, and it's kind of worked. It's been successful, but I would tend to say the sort of self-service conversations were quite sort of rigid. And then, as you can imagine, you've got the big players in the world, like the OK Google and Alexa and Siri, this kind of stuff. Those guys are getting like tremendous volumes of sampling and all sorts of different sort of accents and locales and languages, and all of that kind of is kind of tremendous value for us to leverage and kind of bring into the kind of picture. So you're going to start to see, I think, like from our own sort of perspective, we're kind of drawing on some of those sort of players into our sort of like ecosystem, because it makes sense to just have that tremendous sampling capability. So I would say expect a lot more from voice recognition going forward.
Absolutely. I think that kind of leads on well to your presentation. But before I pass the baton over to you, Mike, I just wanted to ask this the following question to our audience, which is how have handling times changed in your contact center over the past year on the voice channel? Whether so you can choose between decreased greatly, decreased slightly, stayed very much the same, increased slightly, and increased greatly. So I just launched that poll for everyone. So Mike, what are you expecting to see on this one?
So we kind of had this notion that more complex stuff is getting into the call center part of the contact center. So to that end, I would sort of hope to sort of see some increase, I suppose, because some of the more simple and mundane things are being sort of either automated or just taken care of on websites, perhaps. So that's kind of where I'm thinking.
Yeah, let's see what the results are. So I think the kind of results reflect what you were saying there, Mike, with 43% increase slightly, 29% stay very much the same, 20% decrease slightly, and then smaller percentages for increase greatly and decrease greatly, as you would expect over the course of the year. So I think that's a nice little takeaway to lead on to your presentation, Mike. So I'll just pass control over to you now.
Okay, and you can confirm it's showing okay, Charlie?
Yeah, it's all good for me.
Good. Okay, so thanks, Martin and Charlie, for the content so far. My section really is just to, I suppose, bring some thoughts really to the audience around, if you like, the rules for customer experience, because we're expecting to see some significant change in the kind of months ahead. And to that end, I kind of want to just set that out really as a sort of a thought-provoking exercise, really. And it kind of generates this sort of notion that if we are kind of moving more towards the sort of digital sort of priority really for customer experience, then I suppose a new rule for me would be to be there for your customers, anytime and across any channel. That's kind of just something I would have, and that's not necessarily a spoiler alert, but it's just I want to kind of put that out there as a sort of a target, maybe, let's say. But let's kind of jump into this, and I kind of look forward to the feedback from the audience. So we have these statistics, and I'm sure you've seen variants of these in lots of different places. But we know that consumers are expecting more, and I'm kind of looking for my mobile. But essentially, it's because of that sort of effect that the mobile has, where you really are kind of always connected, and you're always like real time or always on. So from that perspective, if I'm kind of always on and sort of always real time, why can't my providers be in the same way? So to that end, that expectation of 64% of consumers want a fast, timely response from their providers is something that we've got to kind of wrestle with. And sometimes that's okay because it's an easy question, and sometimes it can become a bit more difficult to be that sort of responsive, shall we say. But similarly, the fussy consumer is saying that they expect, if you like, that everywhere. And 65% say that they're likely to switch brands if they're not actually getting that consistent customer experience. And interestingly, they're saying across platforms, be that in store. That's kind of a curious one, really. Phone, online, text, email, etc. So I can understand the contact center elements, but the fact that they kind of want to feel a kind of consistency across the entire organization, I think is a good, healthy target, I suppose, really. And I'd like to sort of spend a bit more time in exploring that one. I think so. As expectations, if you like, from the consumer, I suppose the challenge then for us is how we respond to that, right? And this kind of view here from Gartner is kind of telling, and just sort of give us some attention, I would say, because it's not getting easier. And we're at like column number 3 in 2019, and they're kind of forecasting out to 2022, and that's not too far away, right? But this one kind of caught my attention about the fact that IVR would sort of see this growth, which is quite interesting, and may kind of feedback a little bit to Adrian's comment earlier about the sort of voice recognition. But that was kind of a curious one for me as well. I kind of felt that maybe just like if you can see the voice color blue at the bottom, so that the number of calls, if you like, is not expected to increase that much over time. But maybe the number of self-service calls is going to increase quite dramatically. So that's kind of curious. The other one, of course, I think as well is the chatbots, and clearly we're all familiar with that. And everybody has a chatbot, and everybody's providing chatbots, and they're all AI enabled, and they're all super. But that explosive growth really is kind of coming, I suppose, from a less established start. But certainly it's going to be a priority channel for us to wrestle with in the months ahead. And then the kind of the headline grabber, I suppose, really is the fact that all interactions will increase, 3.5 fold. Okay, so if you're handling 100 today, it'll be 350 in 2020. So from that perspective, that's quite dramatic. And I kind of feel, are we actually ready for that explosive growth? And I predict most of that will be around digital. But really, I think we have to start to seriously put some planning together around how we're going to kind of work with that, because we just can't triple the size of our sort of operations, right? That's just not, it's just not practical. And if you pop around to your CFO and ask that question, I think we'd all get a pretty short response. The other factor as well is that it's not getting any cheaper. So although we have these kind of channels which are like the premium channels, where we're kind of effectively talking to the customer with a human agent, having that full intimate conversation, around then to maybe like video. So I think like for high-end products, it's kind of cool to kind of extend that conversation into a more meaningful, if you like meeting, like a mini meeting, which I think is really, really nice for like mortgages, those type of things. But really, as the costs increase, so there's this challenge increases, right? So we really got to figure out a way to get those simple interactions dealt with in a kind of cost-effective but experience appropriate way, without kind of like burdening us with the additional costs. And then so here we have this kind of like this chasm of the status quo, right? So the expectation is on the left and the reality is on the right, and we have to kind of help the organizations kind of move across. And we know the expectations keep increasing, and what factually we see happening, if you will, is that yes, there's lots of traditional, I would say, digital happening, and we kind of saw it in the first slide, I think, as well. But there isn't that so much, I would say, complete digital happening, and perhaps that needs to be an area where we need to invest more and get a bit smarter, perhaps. Certainly, I think we're seeing that sort of that status quo, I think, is going to become the sort of like the critical point. And I suppose I would argue and sort of like urge people to think about this quite seriously. Start putting in your thinking now. I'm sure you're actually seeing some behaviors happening where you're seeing these sort of volumes increase. But to actually be able to respond to that, we're going to have to take some serious decisions. And typically, the old tech ain't going to cut it, right? And what we're finding is, if you like, this is becoming quite an interesting driver for people to get to cloud. Whereas before it was more about, maybe moving the whole contact center to the cloud, but actually maybe moving the digital to the cloud would make more immediate sense, perhaps. So just some ideas there to think about. What our experience is kind of brought in as kind of Genesis really is that it's often difficult for your customers to engage, and it's more expensive for you to serve, right? So to that end, typically that would be a sort of a technology silo. And when we see those, they're just like ripe opportunities to kind of reduce costs. And you're helping your customer, I suppose, is the key message here, really. Giving them the access to the channels, at any time, allowing them to kind of do the simple things very, very easily. Giving them the tools to be able to do that. Eliminate those kind of repeat calls and transfers. If they haven't been kind of rooted out by now, then you're really not kind of getting to understand your operation. And I kind of work with customers who regularly kind of get in a huddle across department, and I kind of mentioned this before. And the purpose of that is to understand, why did the customer contact us? For this reason. So, really drill into that reason and trying to, understand it and root it out and kind of stop the customer having to make that repeat call. What is the communication, or what is the process that's broken that's caused that? And similarly with transfers, why do I have to transfer? What is it that's going to cause the customer to get to the wrong place, or that needs me to kind of transfer? That's waste. So kind of get really focused on that and kind of help to eliminate that. We kind of can't afford it in the kind of months ahead, given the sort of challenges coming. So if you don't fix it now, it's just going to get bigger tomorrow. So that's kind of a way to look at it. if you like, beating the kind of rising demand and exceeding the expectations, it needs an automation platform. So that's really where my kind of rule is kind of kicking in right now. So you got to be able to, if you like, design the right sort of conversation for your customer in digital. And therefore, think about technologies that allow you to do that. Think about the sort of case where you can launch maybe a bot conversation. But if you like, if you're finding it sort of, it's got a challenge, being able to sort of change yourself simply, quickly, that's the kind of tool you kind of need, really, not being dependent on a sort of a provider, shall we say. So that sort of accelerating and time to value is very, very important. And you'll sort of see from some demos, if you like, that we've done for other organizations. You can kind of do this thing very, very quickly yourselves, kind of like within minutes. And if that's not the kind of tools you're getting engaged in, then step away from that, because there are options out there that are easier. I'm seeing a lot of people spending a lot of money getting their kind of data ready for AI. And I'm thinking, why is it taking so much time and cost to get your data ready for AI? And these things are becoming some of the barriers to adoption of this kind of automation. So just keep those kind of thoughts in mind, and maybe again just step back and find the right kind of provider that can help you with kind of something more practical. Like, for example, building a bot once and using it across every channel. Why repeat code the same thing? I want to change my address. I want to have a bill response. I want to up my credit limit. I want to top up this or do that. Being able to kind of have that same interface, whether it's through a tablet or on a voice bot, or as I kind of walk into a kiosk, that's the kind of experience I would like to have across whatever messaging channel I choose, whether it's WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. I don't care, but if I can have the same logic being applied to any channel, that's pretty important. And then lastly, we have the kind of the idea of the AI, and this kind of goes to the comment made earlier, I think it was by Dennis, the fact that the AI out there will kind of do quite a lot of work for us, but I don't think any vendor can kind of claim that they've got the kind of like the right to sort of like say, well, we have the answer for everything. It's just too big a subject. And therefore, you're going to need to have this kind of ecosystem of different vendors and different players working together. So again, if you find yourself are kind of being steered very much in one direction with one vendor, in one path, which has got lots and lots of professional services, that's a telltale to say you're in the wrong kind of area. I would say step back, check out other options and explore, because unfortunately, that's kind of happens very often, and then those things become very static and very customized and very rigid, and that's really not what customer experience is about. If you go back to the first point, accelerate, people keep changing their mind. You got to keep dynamically modifying these kind of journeys, I would say, like in real time, but it'll give you the best results for your customer. So there is an option at Genesis called Kate, and I suppose the thing I want to emphasize here really is it's not all about bots and chatbots. It's kind of being able to kind of anticipate, maybe using AI to leverage my workforce management to sort of speed up how I can get my schedules delivered to my people. Maybe I'm taking quite a significant change in my contact center, so help me predict where this kind of threefold increase in transactions will impact me versus my increasing call times, right? Because the calls are getting more complex. Giving sort of better responses. So learning from maybe one channel how we sort of resolve that sort of issue quite quickly, and then sharing that across the other channels in a nice, discreet and fast way. Customer preferences. So you can kind of see there that there's a variety of kind of inward-facing options and I would say outward-facing options for you to consider. So take the time, if you will, and investigate. And I would say think about making the right choice as you go down this path. And kind of like as a sort of a validator against the Gartner report that we sort of looked at earlier. This is some research that Dimension Data do every year, and it's called their benchmarking report. And I'm sure many of you have sort of seen it, but I've kind of filtered it on Europe and specifically on the UK, and I just kind of asked the question of where customers are looking to actively spend within a year, or they've got no plans to spend at all. So green means I'm kind of doing it already. Dark blue means I'm going to do something within the year, and light blue means I've got no plans. But as opposed to kind of complement what we've seen already from Gartner is that things like web chat, things like instant messaging, or all types of messaging, that virtual assistant idea, that's sort of like the self-service, proactive automation, so like the bot type technologies, are all kind of like above 30% of interest from the polled customers around their sort of priorities in the next 12 months. So that's kind of interesting. But kind of going back to the webinar and the sort of theme of the webinar, if we kind of look at the IVR sort of bucket, and kind of similar to Gartner's sort of like view of the IVR, you know, there's such a high volume, if you like, of transactions handling there. I kind of wonder whether that's going to be the sort of the challenge going forward, and maybe the sort of digital IVR is a phrase that we will start to get involved with, if you like, over time. But you know, that's just, you know, my perspective. But I'll be kind of curious on the audience view as well. So with that, Charlie, that takes me to the end of my slot. I hope that's useful, and I look forward to the feedback.
It looks like our chat room has been humming today, and our first opinion has been sent in from Sarah, who says, as we shift customers towards the self-service portal, more complex issues are coming into our advisors via the phones. A good knowledge base helps to keep AHD consistent. I guess this kind of goes back to the opening poll before your presentation, Mike. And do you think kind of the knowledge bases are too often forgotten about technology?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more important, if you like, especially around the kind of the AI subject, because in a way the AI kind of relies on it to provide the answer. So I think you're going to see a bit more of a higher profile really around knowledge, and absolutely you have to be consistent. So to that end, I would say it's becoming more and more mission critical, and you know, even part of that self-service portal, so that you know, perhaps we can get more of the customers' answers answered there before they actually get through to the contact center, perhaps.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it goes nicely as well with your point before presentation as well about how the rising handling times that the industry is most likely going to see in the next few years. We have a tip also now from Laura, who says, I would recommend calibration sessions for removing subjectivity. We've just started having a QA coach and supervisors get together and rate calls so we can all be on the same page. Looking forward to involving the agents with this soon. So I guess, Martin, this has comes back to our earlier calibration discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely, and I think it is really important to have that calibration so that it's you're going to get maximum benefit from going through this exercise by having calibration. Without it, it is a personal opinion and potentially quite provocative as well to agents and advisors. So I think it's essential.
Well, I think, from my point of view, I think what I'm sort of seeing is that Laura's organised, or the organisation that Laura is in is organised, and then they're kind of working hard and deliberately around getting these behaviours and principles and working practices throughout the quality managers and the people. So I think that's really impressive.
Yeah, so it's great to have such great focus on the QM. We have an opinion now sent in from Daniel, who says customer sentiment and keyword analytics for chat support would allow agents to focus on challenging interactions more instead of making happy customers more happy, which I think is a nice and interesting opinion there. So we have a question now from Robert, who says, is there any way to remove subjectivity from empathy? I don't know, Martin, if you have any thoughts on this one.
Well, that's the big question, isn't it, really? I think that calibration certainly helps to do that, but I also think it's about having the people who are doing the measurement who are really understanding what they're looking for and what it is they're trying to extract from that measure, because it's very, very complex and difficult and very personal to, as I said, to both the advisor and the customer. But then there's that personal perspective also from the person who's assessing. So the assessor is also an individual. So quite challenging, and I think possibly doing it more and more and more would help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we also have a tip in now from Jessica, who says, and again on the calibration sessions, who says, we have calibration sessions with advisors. They listen to a call as a group and rate in themselves, and we see how this aligns with our coaches. Really beneficial process. I think that also sounds like a very good process for QM there. We have a tip.
I kind of feel like it brings in quite a lot of like team building, and kind of sharing, and you know, we share the good and we share the bad, right? But we're all kind of working together. So I like that, Jessica. I like that.
Yeah.
Always good to have that notion of teamwork in any kind of line of business. We have a tip now from Natasha, who says we have a plugged in session twice a week, Tuesday and Friday, 3 times a day, where in 15 minutes we highlight current questions from customers and agents to share how they've handled it to date, plus the client's responses. The best responses become the standard for the day. This has been a great way for agents to share and feel values as their input is used in real ways. The balance of the 15 minutes is to spend this time on our value for the month, linked to agent behaviors. This allows the invitation to the rest of the organization, for example, sales. If on the day we receive multiple queries from customers related to sales, it also allows quick standardized resolutions. It naturally leads to the voice of the employee, which is a measure that's too often omitted. Would you think, Martin, that the voice of the employee is a very kind of underrated metric in many contact centers?
Definitely, yes, definitely. And I see lots of organisations that measure it once every 2 years. It's a real-time measure to get the real benefit from it, and this is a really good example. So thank you for that tip, Natasha. It's focusing on being reactive to what customers are actually saying at that particular time, and doing something about it, both in terms of briefing and sharing that information with other agents, but also being able to go back to the process owners and maybe make the changes necessary to remove that angst from customers and the reason for call. So it's really good. Yes, I really like that.
Yeah, excellent. And we have an opinion in now from Laura, who says, we did try having 24/7 social media and chat support for our peak season last year, but it did not prove to be cost effective. Mike, do you have any ideas for how maybe Laura could improve the cost effectiveness of 24-hour chat support?
Yeah, I mean, like, certainly we'd love to have those conversations, and automation would be a key part of that, I think. You know, those kind of tools are there designed just for that. And I think customers kind of get it too, just as long as you're open about the fact that they're working with automation and not try and sort of like pretend that you're not. But yeah, that's how I would kind of see that working, and that would certainly be absolutely cost effective.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation of whether or not to tell the customer if you're using chatbots or not, or if they're speaking to or pretend they're speaking to a real advisor. Which
like you don't.
Yeah, indeed. We have a question now, and probably the final question from Natasha, who says, given the different channels available to clients, in your expert view, what should be the guide to route the work? E.g., if IVR is used for voice routing, should chat, email, and all the other channels follow the same method? I'm looking for a framework to guide the thinking. Well, that's quite a tricky question to answer. I'll go to you first for this one, Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. A very good question, though, Natasha, again. I think that, first of all, it's very easy to say this, but it depends on what your organisation is, what it is you're trying to do, and what those inquiries are about. So looking at the complexity of them. But certainly Mike talked earlier about developing a bot that can be used with the same information, the same knowledge across different channels. So I think that's a real sound piece of advice initially. I think that the framework is a good idea, but I would suggest that that's something you need to. We couldn't answer that here and now, but it's something that you really need to think about. What is the objective of each channel, and what are you trying to do with it, and what are the objectives of, or what are the reasons for customers calling? What are they trying to get out of it?
It's mapping the journeys before implementing anything.
Yeah. And the source of the knowledge, the source of the knowledge to answer those inquiries or take those orders or whatever. But again, about getting consistency.
yeah, it's a very key point. Do you, Mike, feel the same way?
Yeah, I suppose I'd steer the framework, Natasha, towards kind of what you're doing in the IVR, and if you like, extending that. I know that's kind of easier said than done, but the tools are out there to be able to do that. You know, that's kind of what we do for our customers. So from that perspective, we just kind of see it as all the same. And whether it's voice, chat, email, social, it doesn't matter. It should be, if you like, managed, routed, measured in the same way. And if it's not, then, you know, find a kind of different vendor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that was a great point to end today's webinar on. So for everybody that's here, if you could possibly leave in the chat room in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about the webinar today? And we just about have time for our winning tip, which today comes from Haj, who says, we have recently removed any financial impacts or incentives from QA results. This combined with an ongoing education of putting yourself in the customer's shoes has helped our agents offer a more unbiased view of the service delivered. In fact, we have an increase of the percentage of people who have scored their calls lower than the supervisors and were far more honest and critical of the experience. It definitely sounds like a great initiative you have there.
Very good.
Yeah, very good.
Excellent. And just so we can keep improving our webinars in the future, if everybody could complete the survey when they leave today's webinar, which is just 4 questions, that would be really helpful for us to keep improving our webinar program. And just a little note for everybody who wants to reflect back on both Martin and Mike's presentations, that you can view the replay and the slides, which will be available this afternoon on www.callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars. And then we'll be back again in September. So if you want to register for our first 2 webinars, please go to Call Center Helper to do that. But I just about have time now to thank our speakers. So thanks for joining us today. First to Martin.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for everybody who's contributed with either questions or tips, because they're really what make this work through that interactive nature, and some really good input there. Thank you.
Yeah, some great questions today. And thanks to you as well, Mike, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, absolutely agree with your comments. Audience participation.
Indeed. And thanks to everybody who's joined us for today's webinar, and we'll see you again in September. See you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you. See you, Mike.